There's a particular kind of confidence that only exists right before something goes very wrong. Not reckless confidence, measured confidence. The kind built on years of evidence, backed by spreadsheets, endorsed by the most respected minds in finance. The kind that feels in the moment less like optimism and more like arithmetic. Sometime in the early 1970s, the most sophisticated investors in the world had exactly that confidence. They had found the answer, not a theory, not a hunch. The answer. A curated list of 50 companies so dominant, so structurally essential to modern life, that buying them wasn't really a decision at all. It was just logic. And then, with quiet and total precision, the market took that logic apart piece by piece. The year is 1972. America is a country that has walked on the moon, built the interstate highway system, and turned the post-war economic boom into something that feels permanent. Corporate America is minting legends. Xerox has turned a simple idea, the photocopier, into a machine that every office in the country can't function without. Polaroid has put a darkroom in your hands. Avon Products is knocking on the door of literally 1 out of every 3 American homes. These are not speculative bets. These are facts. Companies with real products, real revenues, real customers. The institutional investors, the pension funds, the insurance companies, the mutual funds managing the life savings of ordinary Americans, had surveyed the landscape and made their selection. 50 names. The Nifty 50. The logic of the Nifty 50 was seductively clean. These companies were so good, so competitively impenetrable, so woven into the fabric of daily commerce that you could buy them at any price and still come out ahead. That phrase, any price, is the one that should have set off alarms, but it didn't. Because the pitch had a name, fund managers called them one-decision stocks. You bought them once. You held them forever. You didn't need to think about them again. In an industry that runs on complexity, someone had just offered the ultimate shortcut. 50 names, 0 doubt. And here's where it gets interesting, because the valuations these stocks were commanding weren't just aggressive. They were a different category of number entirely. McDonald's was trading at 83 times earnings. Polaroid had climbed to a price-to-earnings ratio of 91. Disney, not yet the media empire it would become, was sitting at 76 times earnings. To understand what that means, a P/E ratio of 90 implies that if you bought the entire company at that price and it paid you every dollar of profit it earned, you'd wait 90 years to get your money back. 90 years at steady earnings, with no disruption, no recessions, no competition, no technological change. 90 years. And investors were lining up to pay it. Now, before we judge them too harshly, and we should judge them a little, it's worth sitting inside that logic for a moment. Because it wasn't irrational on its face. These were genuinely excellent businesses. McDonald's was growing. Polaroid was innovation itself. The underlying thesis that great companies are worth more than mediocre companies is obviously correct. The error wasn't in identifying quality. The error was in believing that quality existed outside of price, that there was no number, no valuation, at which even the best business in the world became a bad investment. That the ticket to a concert worth attending was worth buying at any cost, even if the show ended before you got to your seat. The S&P 500 hit its high in January 1973, and then, slowly at first and then all at once, the Nifty 50 began to unravel. The oil embargo hit. Inflation erupted, interest rates climbed, the economy, which had seemed to operate on a different set of rules during the long boom, turned out to operate on the same rules as every other economy in history. And those P/E ratios, those extraordinary story-driven, perfectly justified P/E ratio, collapsed. Polaroid fell 91% from peak to trough, not a correction, not a pullback, 91%. McDonald's lost 73% of its value. Xerox dropped more than 70%. Disney, the company that had traded at 76 times earnings because it was Disney, fell over 80%. These weren't bad companies. They were great companies. They were just terrible investments at the prices people had paid for them. The market didn't gently revise its opinion. It issued a verdict. By late 1974, the Nifty 50 as a group had lost roughly 60% of their collective value. And the recovery, this is the part that never gets mentioned, The recovery took 8 years. 8 years before investors who bought at the 1972 peak got back to even. 8 years of watching the same stocks that your research said were the safest thing you could own sit 40, 50, 60% below where you bought them. Not panic selling, not speculative garbage. The most carefully selected, most thoroughly analyzed, most institutionally endorsed companies in the United States. And if you're thinking right now what the institutional investors were thinking back then, that there's something unique about these companies, that the fundamentals really are different this time, then I need you to stay with me for the next 2 minutes. Because there is a phrase that should be illegal in financial markets. This time is different. Not because things never change, they do, but because throughout history, every time a group of investors has convinced themselves that the normal rules of valuation no longer apply, that certain companies have transcended the ordinary gravity of price and earnings. They have been wrong. Without exception, they have been wrong. The Magnificent Seven, Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, Tesla. 7 companies. By late 2024, these 7 names represented roughly 34% of the entire S&P 500. Think about that. 500 companies, 7 of them accounting for more than a third of the index. In the peak of the Nifty 50 era, the top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 represented about 28% of the index. We have surpassed that concentration. We are in territory the Nifty 50 era never quite reached. The logic, too, rhymes in ways that should be uncomfortable. These companies are not just good. They are, the argument goes, structurally untouchable. Their moats aren't competitive advantages. They're operating systems for the global economy. Who is going to out-Google Google? Who is going to build a competitor to AWS from scratch? Who is going to unseat Microsoft from the enterprise? The questions sound rhetorical. They're meant to. In 1972, the same question sounded just as rhetorical about Xerox and Polaroid. Xerox had invented the photocopier. Polaroid had invented instant photography. Who was going to beat them? The answer, it turned out, was time and the quiet indifference of technological change. The valuations, once again, carry a kind of confidence that should slow you down. Nvidia in early 2024 was trading above 65 times forward earnings, not trailing earnings, forward earnings, the optimistic version. Microsoft sat above 35 times. The S&P 500 as a whole, weighted heavily by these 7 names, was trading at a Shiller-Cape ratio. That's a long-run inflation-adjusted measure of market valuation, above 35. The historical average is around 16. The only times in the last 150 years that number has been higher were 1929 and the dot-com peak of 2000. Both of those years ended in a way that investors remember for a long time. Now, and this matters, none of this is a prophecy. John Templeton, who built one of the great fortunes in investment history, once said that the 4 most dangerous words in investing are "this time is different." He didn't say markets always crash when they're expensive. He said that the belief in permanent exception is historically dangerous. There is a difference between valuations are high, therefore the market will crash tomorrow, and valuations of this magnitude have in the past delivered poor returns over the following decade. The second statement is just math. You can look it up. When you buy earnings at 35 times their value, the arithmetic of future returns is simply harder than when you buy them at 15 times. The investors who bought Polaroid at 91 times earnings weren't fools. Some of them were the most analytically rigorous professionals in the world. What they lacked wasn't intelligence. It was the humility to ask whether the story, however compelling, had already been priced in, whether the certainty they felt was a feature of the business or a feature of the moment, whether the queue of other confident people behind them buying the same 50 names had already done the work of sending prices past any reasonable destination. The Nifty 50 bubble is the financial story almost nobody talks about anymore. It doesn't have the cinematic drama of 1929 or the techno fever of 2000. It was quieter, more polite, more reasonable on its surface, which is exactly what makes it the most instructive of the 3. It wasn't built on fraud or mania. It was built on consensus, on the collective, well-reasoned conclusion of the most careful professionals in the market that certain companies had earned a permanent exemption from the ordinary rules of price. They hadn't. No company ever has, so here is where I leave you. Not with a prediction. Anyone who offers you certainty about markets is selling something, but with a question. The next time someone describes a company as a one decision stock, something so dominant, so indispensable, so competitively protected that its valuation is beside the point, ask yourself where you've heard that before. Because there is a list of 50 names assembled in 1972 by some of the most respected institutional investors in the world that would very much like to have a word with you.